My father slid a piece of paper across the counter, straight through the flour, and tapped it twice with one finger. "Sign it before the ovens heat up," he said. He didn't look at me. He was already reaching for his keys. For 5 years, paychecks had been issued in my name at that bakery. I never touched $1 of them. And somewhere in a government filing cabinet, there was a $43,000 federal tax lien against a girl who wasn't old enough to rent a car. That girl was me. Until 6 weeks before that morning, I hadn't known she existed. Here is what my father didn't know while he tapped that paper. Today, I read tax files for a living. I am an enrolled agent, a specialist, licensed by the federal government to stand between ordinary people and the IRS. Families like mine are my caseload now. The last case I ever worked for free was my own. I walked out the back door of that bakery at 6:52 in the morning with $117 and a green cloth ledger. And 4 years later, I made every unpaid hour cost them to the dollar, on paper, signed. My name is Nora Hartwell. I am 26 years old. If you have ever been the free labor in your own family, the one they counted on for everything and counted as nothing, this story is yours as much as mine. Comment the single word ledger below so I know you are out there. And stay with me, because the piece of paper my father wanted signed that morning is the same paper that would one day park a flatbed truck outside his bakery. To understand that morning, you have to come back with me 7 years. One jump, and then we move forward together. And I won't lose you. 7 years before the morning I walked out. I was 13 years old, and my grandmother June was still alive. Grandma June was my father's mother, which people always found surprising because she and my father were not alike in any way I could name. She was small and quick, and she counted everything, not in a greedy way, in a precise way. She had waited tables for 31 years at a supper club in Dayton, Ohio, back when a waitress carried her whole night in her apron pocket. And she used to say that a woman who doesn't count her own money is asking someone else to count it for her. She lived 4 streets over from us, in a brick house with a porch swing. And on Sunday afternoons, I would sit on that swing while she shelled peas or trimmed beans, and she would ask me questions nobody else in my family ever asked. Not how school was, what I thought, what I noticed, whether the noticing matched what people said out loud. The summer I was 13, she gave me a ledger, a real one. Green cloth cover, red spine, the kind of accounting book they sold at office supply stores before everything became a screen. She put it in my hands on the porch swing, and she said, "Write down what you are owed. Junebug, every time. Spamime. Doesn't matter if it is $1 or a favor or an apology. Write it down, and someday read it back without crying." I thought it was a game. I was 13. I wrote down that my brother Caleb owed me $4 for a movie ticket. I wrote down that a girl at school owed me an apology for something I've since forgotten. I showed Grandma June the pages, and she read them like they were scripture, nodding, tapping certain lines. She died 14 months later, in the fall of a heart attack, on that same porch, with the beans half trimmed in the bowl. I was 14. At the funeral, my mother cried beautifully, the way she did everything in public, and my father stood at the door of the church, shaking hands, like a man, accepting congratulations. I wrote it in the ledger that night. I didn't know why. I just knew Grandma June would have wanted it counted. 6 months after she died, so 5.5 years before the morning I walked out, my father woke me up at 4 in the morning, on a school day, and told me to get dressed. That is how it started. No conversation. No offer. He owned a bakery on Wayne Avenue in Dayton, a real one, a good one. Honestly, Hartwell's brick storefront, glass cases, a wholesale account that supplied dinner rolls to 11 restaurants across the city. And that morning, at 15 years old, I became its opening shift. 4:30 a.m., 6 days a week. Before school, I proofed dough. I loaded ovens. I stood at the big steel table in that warm yellow light, while the whole rest of the city was still dark. And I will be honest with you, because this story doesn't work if I lie to you. I loved parts of it. I loved the smell. I loved being good at something with my hands. At 4:30 in the morning, a bakery is the only lit window on the street, and when you are 15, standing inside the only lit window on the street feels like mattering. About a month in, I asked about getting paid. I asked it carefully, the way you learn to ask for things in a house like mine. At the end of a shift, while I was untying my apron, my father didn't get angry. That is the thing I most need you to understand about him. He never got angry. He looked at me with something almost like disappointment, almost like grief, and he said the sentence I would hear, by my count. And I did count. Over 60 times in the next 5 years. Family doesn't keep receipts. He said it gently. He said it the way other men quote their fathers. Family doesn't keep receipts. Nora, your mother doesn't invoice you. For dinner, I don't charge you rent. We're building something here that is going to belong to all of us someday. And when you are older, you'll be embarrassed, you ask. Then he handed me a $20 bill from his own pocket, folded, like a tip, like charity, and he squeezed my shoulder, and I felt ashamed. That was the trick, and it worked for years. He had a way of making the question feel like the crime. That night, I started a new page in the green ledger. Date at the top, hours down the side. 4:30 to 7:15. Monday, 4:30 to 7:15. Tuesday, Saturdays, 4:30 to 2. I told myself it was just a habit, just something I did because Grandma June had told me to. It was not a habit. It was the only place in my life where what happened to me was written down accurately. Remember that ledger. It is small, it is green, and it is going to matter more than anything else in this story. Now, my brother, Caleb, he was 3 years older than me, and he was the sun that house orbited, and I want to be careful here, because it would be easy to make him the villain. And he wasn't. Caleb was the front of the house. He was tall like my father, easy like my father, and his job at the bakery, when he had one, was to stand at the register being charming, on paychecks, real ones, that my mother wrote out to him every other Friday at the kitchen table. I watched her do it. I stood at the counter drinking orange juice at 15 years old, 4:30 shifts in my legs, and watched my mother tear a paycheck out of the book for my brother's weekend register shifts. And when I looked at her, she looked back at me with a completely smooth face and said, "Caleb's saving for school. Honey, it is different." And if you've ever watched your own family do arithmetic where you are always the remainder, you know exactly the sound that sentence makes in your chest. It is not loud. That is what nobody tells you. It is very, very quiet. 8 months after my first shift, I just turned 16. An envelope came to the house with my name on it, my full legal name, Nora June Hartwell, printed through a plastic window, from something called a payroll services company. I got to the mailbox first that day, which I don't think I was supposed to do. Inside was a W-2. If you've never held one, a W-2 is the little form that tells the government what a company paid you that year. It is the receipt for your entire working life. 12 months on one page. And this one said that Hartwell's Bakery had paid Nora June Hartwell $11,400. I stood at the mailbox and read it 4 times. $11,400. I had been paid that year in folded 20s and shame. Maybe $600 total. If I am generous, I carried the form inside and put it on the kitchen counter in front of my mother and asked what it was, and I watched her do something I've thought about for 10 years. She didn't flinch. She didn't pause. She picked it up in one motion, the way you'd pick up a napkin, and she said, "Oh, that is just paperwork, honey. That is the accountant balancing things for the business. It doesn't mean anything," and she folded it into her purse. And she asked if I wanted meatloaf or chicken. I want you to hold on to that image. A 16-year-old's tax form disappearing into her mother's purse between two questions about dinner. Because here is what was actually happening, and I am going to do the math for you now. Once. So it is done, and you never have to do it again. On paper, the bakery was paying me a wage, around $21,600 a year, once I turned 16, and they stopped being shy about it. 4 full years of that, plus the partial years on either end. Roughly $91,000, issued in my name. $91,000. That is a paid-off college degree. That is 6 years of rent in Dayton. That is a whole young life, printed and issued and signed for. And I never saw $1 of it, because every one of those paychecks was deposited into an account I didn't know existed, at a bank branch I'd never been inside, and the only 2 names with access to that account were my mother's and my father's. Why would parents pay a daughter on paper and not in money? Stay with me, because this is where it stops being a sad story and starts being a scheme. A business like my father's has 2 kinds of money problems: taxes and debt, and a daughter who works for free solves both. If you are willing to do what my parents did, wages you pay on paper are a business expense. Expenses lower the taxes the bakery owes, so every fake paycheck to Nora was a real discount for Hartwell's. That is problem 1. Problem 2. The debt is uglier, and it has a date. The summer I turned 17, 3 years before the morning I walked out, my father asked me to stay after my shift because the accountant needed some things signed. That is the whole speech I got. The accountant needs some things signed. There was a stack of paper on the office desk in the back, next to the flower invoices, tabbed with little yellow arrow stickers. Sign here. Sign here. Sign here. My father stood in the doorway with his arms folded, friendly, and told me it was paperwork for the business. Insurance stuff. Don't read it all. We open in 40 minutes, and I signed. I was 17. I had been raised, trained, marinated, in the belief that questions were a form of betrayal. I signed where the arrows pointed, and my father took the stack and squeezed my shoulder and said, "Atta girl, family doesn't keep receipts." What I signed, what I would not lay eyes on again for 4 years, brought a company into the world. Articles of organization. They're called the birth certificate of a business, filed that June with the Ohio Secretary of State, creating a little company called NH Baking Services, a wholesale subcontractor that on paper handled the bakery's restaurant accounts. Its sole owner, its single member, the one human being legally responsible for everything it did and everything it owed, was a 17-year-old girl who thought she was signing insurance forms. N.H. Nora Hartwell. They named it after me, the way you'd name a boat. And here is the detail that should make the hair on your arms stand up. A document like that gets notarized, stamped by an official witness whose whole job is to swear you were really in the room, really informed, really you. The stamp on mine belonged to a man from my parents' church who did notary work on the side. His commission, his legal license to stamp anything at all, had expired 8 months before he stamped mine. Hold on to him, too. The expired stamp is a loose thread, and I am the kind of woman who pulls. So by 17 I was, without knowing it, a business owner. The bakery routed its wholesale money through my little company. My little company paid me my little fake wages. And when my little company started collecting payroll taxes from its paperwork employees and simply never sending that money to the government came looking for the owner, me. But that letter was still 3 years away. First, the family had some celebrating to do, because that same summer, Caleb got his truck. Brand new, dealer plates, a bow zip, tied to the grill, parked in the driveway on a Sunday after church, while my mother filmed it on her phone. Caleb, to his credit, looked embarrassed. He hugged me on the porch and said, "This is nuts, right?" And I said, "Yes, it is nuts," and I smiled. Because in my family, my face had one setting in public. That truck cost $38,000. I know the exact number now, for reasons you can probably guess. And I know something else, too. I know which account the down payment came out of. Some nights I do wonder whether my brother has ever done the arithmetic on his own life, whether he knows he drove to college on my 4:30 mornings. I've decided not to be the one to tell him. You'll see why. At the end, the last rung on this ladder is small, and it is the one that finally made me look down. About a year before the morning I walked out, I was 19, and my best friend from school, and I tried to rent an apartment together. Nothing fancy, a 2-bedroom over a dry cleaner, $640 a month. Split, I had my folded 20s saved in a shoebox, $2,200, and I remember feeling proud walking into that leasing office. Adult. The application asked for my social security number, and I wrote it in careful, certain digits. 2 days later, the leasing agent called my friend. Not me, and my friend went quiet on the phone. And then she came over and sat on the end of my bed and said, "Nora, they turned us down because of you." She said, the agent used the words. Given her history, I was 19 years old. I had never owned a credit card. I had never taken out a loan. I had never been late on anything, because I had never been trusted with anything. And a stranger in a leasing office was looking at a file with my name on it and seeing a history. I told my friend it had to be a mistake. Thin credit, some computer thing. She believed me. I almost believed me. I wrote one line in the green ledger that night. What history? 2 words and a question mark. That question mark sat in the ledger for 11 months, like a lit fuse. Then came the 6 weeks. The last 6 weeks of my old life, and I need you to see them clearly, because everything I did afterward, everything my parents would later call cold, calculated, vindictive, began in these 6 weeks. At a mailbox, on an ordinary gray Tuesday in late January, the envelope was thicker than normal mail, and it had my name in the plastic window, and it came from the Department of the Treasury, Internal Revenue Service, not a W-2. This time, a final notice. That is what it says, right at the top, in language designed to stop your heart. Notice of intent to levy. In plain words, the letter the government sends when it is done writing letters and is about to start taking things. Bank accounts, wages, property. It was addressed to me as the responsible party for NH Baking Services. It said the company had collected payroll taxes and failed to turn them over, year after year, and it gave a number, $43,200. I read it, standing at the same mailbox, where I'd once read a W, -24 times. I did not cry. I want that on the record. I didn't cry, and I didn't storm inside, and I didn't call anyone. I stood there in the cold and felt something in my chest rotate, very slowly, like a lock. Because here is the thing about being raised, as the family's remainder. You spend years half knowing. You catch the edges of it. The purse, the paychecks, the yellow arrows. And you file each edge away separately, because looking at them together would cost you the family. And the family is the only thing you've ever been allowed to have. That letter put every edge on one page. There was no way to half know a levy notice. So here is what I did with my 6 weeks, and I did it quietly, and I did it legally. And if you take nothing else from this story, take this part. I did not scream. I did not confront. Confrontation warns people. Instead, I made copies. I still opened the bakery every morning. 4:30 a.m. Apron on, ovens loaded, a talk girl. And in the evenings, I did something no one in that house had ever imagined I'd do. Because no one in that house had ever imagined me at all. I read. I sat in the public library on Patterson, with the levy notice flattened on the table, and I taught myself what every word in it meant. I learned that I could request my own records from the IRS. Anyone can. It is your file. About your name. Transcripts showing every wage ever reported under my Social Security number. I requested them. I learned that the birth certificate of a company, those articles of organization, is a public record. Anyone can pull from the Secretary of State. I pulled mine. I learned what a notary's stamp is supposed to guarantee, and I learned that Ohio keeps a public register of every notary, and the exact dates their commissions live and die. I looked up the man from my parents' church. I wrote one date from that register into the green ledger, and underlined it twice. And at night, at home, I photographed the ledger itself, every page. 5 years of 4:30 mornings in a teenager's handwriting, dated, totaled, continuous. Grandma, June's game. 260 pages of what you are owed, written down every time. By the first week of March, I had a folder, and I had a plan that was not revenge. Not yet. I want to be honest about the order of things. The plan was just to leave. Quietly, on a Sunday, with the folder and the shoebox money, and to send the IRS a letter from somewhere safe. That was the whole plan. My parents are the reason it didn't stay that small. Because on the 4th of March, a Monday, 6 weeks after the levy notice, my father slid a piece of paper across the flour and asked his unpaid daughter for one signature, too many. Let me give you that morning minute by minute, because I have replayed it that way for 7 years, and it deserves to be told the way it lives in me. 4:22 am. I parked behind the bakery. Same as always. The alley smelled like cold rain and yesterday's yeast. I had the green ledger in my bag. I'd started carrying it everywhere by then, the way other people carry a phone charger. In my trunk, under the emergency blanket, was the folder. I did not know it was the last morning. I thought I had 2 more weeks of pretending in me. 4:30 a.m. Ovens on. I did the work, and I did it well because the work was never the enemy. I laid out 48 dinner rolls for the wholesale run, and I remember thinking that I could do this blind, that this skill was mine, that whatever else they'd taken, the hands were mine. 5:50 a.m. My father came in through the back, early for him, in the good jacket he wore to the bank, and that detail landed somewhere low in my stomach before my brain caught up. The bank jacket, on a Monday, at 5:50 in the morning. 6:10 a.m. My mother arrived. My mother did not work. Mornings, she came in carrying coffee for my father, and nothing for me, which was so ordinary I wouldn't even mention it, except that she also wouldn't meet my eyes, and my mother could meet anyone's eyes. I had seen her meet mine over a disappearing W-2, without a flicker. Whatever needed doing that morning, was big enough to bend even her. 6:40 a.m. My father came out of the office with a single sheet of paper and a pen from the bank, and he put the paper down on the steel table, on the flour, in front of me, and tapped it twice. "Sign it before the ovens heat up," he said. Then, because I didn't move, he added the softener. "It is for the new oven. Nora, the deck oven. We're growing. This is for all of us." I looked at the paper. I will describe to you exactly what I saw, because what I saw is the reason everything after happened. It was a loan document. Equipment financing, $58,000. From the bank, whose jacket my father was wearing. And on the line at the bottom, under the word guarantor. The person who promises to pay if the business doesn't. The person whose whole life stands behind the debt. Was a signature line with my name printed beneath it. Nora, June, Hartwell. Not my father's name. Not the bakery's. Mine. They were growing the family business on the credit of the one family member who'd never been paid. Because her name was the only one left that the banks didn't already know too well. And here is the part I have never told anyone before this video. The printed date next to my signature line was not that day's date. It was a date from the previous spring, April 11th. They weren't asking me to take out a loan. The loan already existed. Somebody had already signed my name to it 11 months earlier. And something. An audit. A refinance. A nervous banker. I'd learn which soon enough. Now required the real Nora's ink on a fresh copy. They needed me to backfill my own forgery. That is what sign it before the ovens heat up meant. I stood there with flour on my hands, and I did the only piece of arithmetic that morning that mattered. April 11th, the previous spring. I know that date. The way you know a scar. On April 11th, I was in a bed at Miami Valley Hospital, with my appendix in a pan. Admitted the 10th, cut open the 11th, discharged the 12th, and there is a time-stamped hospital record for every hour of it. Whoever signed Nora Hartwell at a bank branch that afternoon signed it while Nora Hartwell was unconscious. 6:41 a.m. I looked up at my father, and I asked him the only question I had left, in a voice so calm, it frightened me a little. From the inside, I said, "Who has been cashing my paychecks?" "Dad." The room changed. Pressure. My mother set her coffee down, without a sound, which from her was a scream. And my father, I'll give him this. He was magnificent. He didn't blink. My father sighed like a tired man being asked, one more time, to explain gravity to a child. "Nora," he said, "family doesn't keep receipts." 6:42 am. I said, "I know." I picked up my bag with the ledger in it. I untied my apron and I folded it. Actually folded it, edges square, and set it on the steel table next to the loan paper. And I think the folding scared them more than shouting would have. Because shouting is a door swung hard, and folding is a door being locked from the other side. My mother found her voice. At the end, she said, "Nora, honey, if you walk out on this family over paperwork, don't come back expecting anything." And I stopped, one hand on the back door, and I told her the truth. I said, "I've seen the paperwork, Mom. That is why I am walking." 6:52 am. I stood in the alley in the cold with $117 in my wallet, the folder in my trunk, 5 years of unpaid mornings in a green ledger, and no idea where I was going. If you have ever left everything you know with less than the price of a decent winter coat, drop the word ledger in the comments and subscribe, because the next part of this story is for you specifically. It is the part where a stranger did for me in one afternoon what my family hadn't done in 20 years. She believed my file before she believed my face. I slept in my car for 2 nights in a church parking lot in Kettering. And on the third morning, because the levy deadline was doing laps in my head, I walked into the first place I found with the word tax on the window. It was a storefront office between a vacuum repair shop and a nail salon. Kowalczyk Tax and Ledger, the sign said, and I'm not embarrassed to tell you that the second word on that sign is the entire reason I picked that door and not another one. Inside, there were metal filing cabinets to the ceiling, and a smell of burnt coffee, and a woman of about 65, with reading glasses pushed up into gray hair. And that was Frances. Frances Kowalczyk had been an enrolled agent for 31 years. I put the levy notice on her desk, and I said, I think my parents did this in my name. And I braced for the look. You know the look. The one that says, that is a big accusation. Sweetheart, families don't do that. Frances didn't give me the look. Frances put on her glasses and read the notice, front and back, and then held out her hand and said, What else have you got? I gave her the folder. She read for 40 minutes, without speaking, while I sat in a plastic chair learning how to breathe again. Then I gave her the ledger, and I watched a 65-year-old tax professional turn the pages of a teenager's handwriting. 5 years of 4:30 a.m. entries, and take her glasses off, and press 2 fingers against her eyes for a second. And then Frances Kowalczyk said the sentence I will remember for the rest of my life. She tapped the ledger, the way my father had tapped the loan. 2 taps, the same gesture pointed in the opposite direction. And she said, Nora, the people who tell you not to count are always the ones doing the counting. I have carried that sentence for 7 years. I've said it to clients in that same plastic chair. Because that is the whole machine, isn't it? In one line. Family doesn't keep receipts. Wasn't a value. It was a security system. It only ever ran in one direction. They kept receipts on me from the day I turned 15. Printed them, filed them, deducted them. The only person forbidden from counting was the one being counted. Frances did 3 things that first afternoon, in order, and the order matters. First, she made me soup. There was a hot plate in the back room, and she made canned soup like it was a legal procedure. And she watched me eat it and didn't ask a single question that wasn't on a form. Second, she filed the request that froze the levy while my case was heard, so the government would not empty a shoebox savings account over a debt built in my stolen name. Third, at 5 p.m., she looked at me over her glasses and said, The front desk pays $13 an hour. We open at 8. Don't be early. It is annoying. I want to be careful here, because this next stretch of my life covers 3 years and I refuse to bore you with it. So here is the montage, and then we get to the part you came for. I answered phones. I filed. I found a room in a widow's house for $300 a month. I ate a truly stupid amount of canned soup. And every night, Frances left textbooks on my desk without comment, like a cat leaving birds, and I read them the way other people watch television. It turns out that a childhood spent decoding a dangerous house makes you unusually good at decoding the tax code. Both are systems where the truth is technically written down, and no one expects you to read it. I passed the first part of the federal enrollment exam 11 months in, the second part that spring, the third that fall. 2 months after my 23rd birthday, the Treasury Department mailed me a certificate with my name on it. The first document in my entire life that had my name on it because I chose to put it there. Enrolled agent. Licensed to represent any taxpayer. Before the IRS in all 50 states. Frances hung it on the office wall herself. Crooked, and refused to fix it. Keeps you humble, she said. And now you know both halves of the woman who, 1 year ago last spring, finally sat down at that same desk after hours, took out her own file, and went to work on the last unpaid case in the drawer. Stay with me. this is where it changes. People ask why I waited 3 years. Not fear, and not mercy. I had watched too many clients walk into a fight, like this, armed with feelings, and feelings lose. Institutions run on paper, so if the wound was made of paper, the justice would have to be made of paper too. And I wanted mine complete, airtight. Coincidence. Free. I was not going to get one shot at my family. And by that spring, the folder from my trunk had grown into 3 folders. And I want to show you what was in them. One at a time, the way I laid them out on Francis's conference table on a Sunday night, with the blinds down. 3 pieces of paper. 3. That is all. You do not need 40 documents to take a scheme apart. You need the 3 that cannot be argued with. The first, I call the birth certificate. The Articles of Organization for NH Baking Services, pulled from the Ohio Secretary of State. Public record, $4. It proved the company existed, that it was created the summer I was 17, and that its sole owner, on paper, was me. On its own, that document was their weapon. It was the paper that made a teenager legally responsible for every tax the company ever skipped. But turn it over. On the notarization page, there is the stamp of the family friend from church, the man whose seal swore that I had knowingly, willingly signed. And next to that stamp, in the state's own notary register, which is public and permanent, and does not attend your church, is the date his commission expired, 8 months before he inked my page. In plain words, the one official witness to the founding of my company was not legally a witness to anything. The birth certificate was born invalid. Nobody had ever done the search, because nobody had ever imagined the girl at the ovens would grow up to do searches for a living. The second folder, I call the ghost paychecks. My own IRS wage transcripts, the government's master list of every dollar ever reported under my Social Security number, side by side, with something better. Because once I filed the right affidavit, once the fraud investigation formally opened, the paper trail I couldn't reach as a daughter became reachable as a case. Bank records. And the bank records showed the whole circuit in 4 columns. Payroll issued to Nora June Hartwell, deposited every 2 weeks, for 5 years, into an account at a branch on Brown Street, an account opened when I was 15, an account whose signature card, the form that says who may touch the money, carried 2 names, and neither of them. Roughly $91,000 flowed into that account wearing my name, and flowed out again as a truck down payment, as a kitchen renovation, as my parents' Novembers in Florida. $91,000. I said earlier what that number is. It is a degree. It is 6 years of rent. Standing at that conference table, I found the truest translation. It is a daughter at wholesale. And the third folder, the oven loan. $58,000 of equipment financing, personally guaranteed by a signature dated April 11th. Laid side by side with a hospital discharge summary from Miami Valley. Time-stamped. Doctor signed, proving that the guarantor spent April 11th under general anesthesia. There are documents that require an expert to explain. This was not one of them. Any human being alive can hold those 2 pages, one in each hand, and understand in 4 seconds that a crime happened. That was the folder for the people who don't read footnotes. That was the folder for the bank. 3 folders. The invalid foundation. The ghost circuit. The impossible signature. Francis came in that Sunday night around 9 with 2 coffees, looked at the table for a long moment, and said, "Well, you counted." Then she sat down across from me, and we built the sequence, and I want to walk you through what we actually did, step by step, because the internet is full of revenge stories where the hero wins through a lucky glitch or a leaked email. And I am here to tell you the colder truth. I never broke a rule. Not one. That was the entire point. My parents spent 20 years betting that I would keep protecting the family, and they were half right. I followed every rule in the book. I just stopped pretending. The book didn't apply to them. Nep 1, the federal affidavit. There is a form. The government calls it an identity theft affidavit. That exists for exactly one purpose. It is the official document where you state, under penalty of perjury, that a name was used without its owner. I had filed dozens of them for clients. Filing my own took 11 minutes and 3 years. Attached to it, 400 pages of exhibits, the 3 folders, and the ledger. All 260 photographed pages of it, because a fraud examiner at the IRS can be told a girl worked unpaid for 5 years. Or she can be shown 5 years of dated, continuous, handwritten 4:30 a.m. entries in a child's handwriting, slowly becoming a woman's. One is a claim. The other is a life. Counted. Step 2. The police report. Identity theft is a crime, and the affidavit expects a report number. So on a Tuesday morning, I sat in a beige room at the Dayton Police Department and gave a detective the shortest version of this story, and watched him photograph the lone signature in the hospital record, one in each hand, and watched his eyebrows do the 4-second math. Report filed. Number. Issued. I wrote the number in the green ledger, on a fresh page, under a heading I permitted myself as my single indulgence. The heading said, Receipts, Step 3. The letter to the bank. Not an angry letter. The opposite. The driest, most procedural letter of my career. On office letterhead, informing the lender that the personal guarantee securing loan number, such and such, carried a contested signature, enclosing the hospital record, the police report number, and the federal affidavit, and requesting review. Banks do not panic at emotion. Banks panic at exhibits. A forged guarantee means the loan is unsecured, and an unsecured loan that traces to fraud gets escalated past the branch, past the region, to a department whose entire job is making problems. Like my father, go away. Step 4. The quietest one. A 2-page complaint to the office in Columbus that governs notaries, with the register printout and the stamped page, reporting that a commission expired in October had been used the following June. I did it because his stamp was the keystone. Pull it, and the state itself. Not me, not the bitter daughter. The state would declare the founding document of NH Baking Services defective. I didn't need to argue that the company was a puppet. I needed the government to notice, in writing, that the puppet had never been properly born. Then, I did the hardest thing in this entire story. Nothing. For 19 weeks, I went to work. I saw clients. I ate Francis's soup. And I let 4 slow institutions do what slow institutions do. If you've ever had to sit still while justice moved at the speed of paperwork, you know that silence has a weight you carry in your back teeth. 19 weeks. And then, over one single autumn, the letters started landing, and I am going to read you the scoreboard the way it happened, in flat language, because the flatness is the point. The IRS resolved my case. First, the determination letter. I keep it framed now, and I'll tell you where at the end. Stated that the identity theft claim was substantiated. In plain words, the government agreed. I was not the owner of that company in any way that mattered, and I had never touched its money. The $43,000 lien against my name was released, withdrawn, erased from my record, as if it had never existed. And here is the part my parents did not see coming. because they had never read the part of the book I live in. That tax debt did not evaporate. There is a rule, the government's own recovery rule for exactly this. That lets the IRS chase the actual human beings who collected the tax money and kept it. The investigators followed the ghost circuit to the account on Brown Street, to the 2 names on the signature card, and they assessed the full amount, plus penalties. Personally, against my mother and my father, the debt I had carried without knowing for years landed on their kitchen table in a single envelope. And unlike me, they had known it was coming for 20 years. The bank moved next. Their fraud review confirmed what 4 seconds with 2 documents confirms. And a forged guarantee gave them the right to call the oven loan, demand the whole balance. At once, in full. My father could not pay $58,000 at once in full. So the bank took its collateral. On a Thursday morning in October, a flatbed truck parked on Wayne Avenue, and 2 men with a dolly wheeled the deck oven. The growth, the future, the this is for all of us, out through the front door of Hartwell's Bakery, past the glass cases, in front of the morning customers. I was not there. A former coworker sent me a photograph. I looked at it for a long time, and I felt the thing I had been promised I would feel. And I want to be honest with you about what that thing was. It was not joy. It was quiet. It was the specific quiet of a sum, finally balancing. The state came third. The notary's commission was formally revoked with a written finding, and that finding did exactly what a keystone does when it leaves an arch. With the founding document declared defective, NH Baking Services was administratively dissolved, struck off, in plain words, declared to have never been validly mine, which meant every wholesale contract the bakery had routed through it for 4 years had been signed by a company that, legally speaking, did not exist. The grocery distributor, who carried Hartwell's rolls to 11 restaurants, has lawyers who read state bulletins. The wholesale account, more than half the bakery's income, was suspended pending review, and the review never ended in their favor. 3 letters. 1 autumn. No screaming, no lawsuit of mine, no leaked recording, no lucky glitch, just their own documents, hand-delivered by me to the institutions. Those documents were designed to fool. I saw my parents exactly once during all of it, and I chose the time and the place, because that courtesy, telling them to their faces before the last letter landed, was for me, not for them. It was the receipt I wrote for myself. I called my father and said I would come to the bakery on Sunday at 7 a.m. before opening, and I heard him exhale into the phone like relief, because he thought Sunday at 7 a.m. meant the daughter was coming home to fix it. He had that much right. I was coming to fix it. They were both there. The good jacket. Coffee. For 2. My mother had set out 3 plates with slices of the lemon cake, which nearly undid me, not out of tenderness, because it was strategy. And I could see the strategy. And there is a specific grief in being old enough to see your mother's strategy. I did not sit down. I stood at the steel table where I had folded my apron 3 years earlier, and I opened the ledger to the page marked receipts. And I informed them. 4 statements. I had numbered them the night before, and I delivered them in order, in the voice I use with the IRS, which is the voice of weather. This is happening. Bring an umbrella. Or don't. 1. A federal affidavit and a police report exist, stating under oath that my name was used without me. Nothing either of you says in this room can unfile them. 2. The lien is off my name. The government has ruled it was never mine. The same ruling names the people whose account received the money, and their letter is already in the mail. You'll want to open it, standing up. 3. The bank knows the April 11th signature was written while I was in surgery. The guarantee is void. What happens to the loan now is between you and them, and they are not family. So they do keep receipts. 4. And the company you named after me is being dissolved by the state because the man who stamped it had no stamp. I didn't take the wholesale account from you. You built it on my name, and my name just got up and walked out. Again. Silence. Then my father did the last magnificent thing I ever saw him do. He didn't deny one word. He folded his hands, and he looked at me with that old grief-flavored disappointment, and he reached for the sentence. The sentence, the one that had run that house for 20 years. Nora, he said, after everything this family gave you, family doesn't. And I said, I know, Dad. Family doesn't keep receipts. I closed the ledger and picked it up off the table. That is why I did. I was in the alley before either of them found a next word. My mother came to the back door and called after me, and what she called was not an apology. And I want you to hear it exactly, because it tells you everything about how a machine like that family thinks even while it is coming apart. She called out, "You are going to regret this when you need us someday." I didn't turn around. I got in my car and I drove to the office. And I worked a normal Sunday because I had clients, and my clients pay me. And that is not a small sentence. That is the whole sentence. They escalated. Of course, that is the phase nobody warns you about. After the reckoning comes the flood. 41 voicemails from my mother over that autumn. And I know the number because I logged each one in the ledger, date and length. The way I log everything now. They came in 3 flavors, and always in the same order. Fury, then bargaining, then the last flavor, the one that almost worked, the soft one. Honey, we're getting older. My father sent one email, exactly 4 paragraphs, in November, after the oven left on the flatbed. It contains the words hurt, ungrateful, sacrifice, and disappointed. It does not contain the word sorry. 4 paragraphs about a family destroyed by a daughter's paperwork, written by a man who never once mentioned that the paperwork was his. I answered it with 1 line, and then I never answered anything again. I wrote, I learned it from watching you balance the books. And then my mother showed up at Kowalczyk Tax and Ledger on a Friday in December, in her church coat and Frances, 68 years old by then, 5'2", met her at the front desk before I even heard the door, and told her, this office represents Miss Hartwell. All communication goes through the file, and held that door open with 1 arm, like a woman who had spent 30 years being underestimated by people in nicer coats. My mother looked past her at me, over the filing cabinets, for about 3 seconds. I looked back. I did not get up. That was the last time I saw her. I cried once through all of it. I promised you honesty. So here is where, not at the bakery, not at the flatbed photograph. It was the day the IRS determination letter came. The letter that said, in government language, substantiated, released, withdrawn. I read it standing at the office mailbox because apparently my life pivots at mailboxes. And I was fine, completely fine. And I got into my car to drive to lunch. And instead I sat in the parking lot with my hands at 10 and 2 and cried for 11 minutes. Not about the money. I cried because a federal agency that processes 200 million returns a year had looked at my file and done the one thing my own family never did with 20 years of chances. It checked the record, and it believed me. So, where does a story like this end? I'll tell you where it doesn't. It doesn't end with a reunion. There was no tearful holiday, no deathbed forgiveness, and I have stopped apologizing for that, because the internet loves a redemption arc, and I love the truth more. My parents kept the bakery. Barely, smaller now, retail only. No wholesale, no second oven, no elder statesman. Table at church, since the notary finding made its quiet lap through the congregation. They are still married, still there, still telling a version of this story in which paperwork attacked them. Out of a clear blue sky, I let them keep their version. Mine is notarized, properly. But there was one thread worth saving, and I want to leave you holding it. 2 years after the flatbed, my phone rang on a Tuesday, and it was Caleb, my brother, the son we hadn't spoken since the autumn of letters. He didn't apologize and he didn't accuse. And then he said, "Nora, I got a letter from the IRS about a truck, and I don't understand it. And I don't want to ask Dad because I don't believe anything Dad says about money anymore." And then, quieter, "Will you look at it?" My golden brother, calling the remainder to ask her to check the family math. He came to the office. He sat in the plastic chair. The truck issue was small, a down payment gift that had never been reported right, an afternoon's fix. And I fixed it. And I charged him my full rate, and he paid it laughing. And both of us understood exactly what that transaction was. It was the first honest receipt in the history of our family. He has come back every spring since. We do his taxes, and then we get lunch, and we don't talk about our parents, and it is small, and it is real. And I have learned that small and real beats big and false, by a margin you cannot count. Last spring, my life did one more quiet loop. A girl came into the office, 19 years old, with a levy notice folded into eighths, like she'd been hiding it in a pocket, which she had. Her family runs a landscaping company. She has been on its payroll, on paper, since she was 16. She has never seen a paycheck. She sat in the plastic chair with the exact face I brought into this office 7 years ago. The face of a person about to be told, one more time, that families don't do that. I slid the notice back across the desk to her, through the space where flour used to be in another lifetime, and I tapped it twice. And I said, "They counted on you never counting. Let's count." Frances retired last summer. She sold me the practice for a fair price, and one condition, that the word ledger never comes off the window, which was never in danger. My enrollment certificate hangs on the wall, still crooked. Next to it hangs a framed government letter, with the word withdrawn in it, and below them both, on a small shelf I had built at exactly the height of a porch swing armrest, sits a green cloth ledger with a red spine, closed. On the first page, in a dead waitress's handwriting, it still says what it has said since I was 13. Write down what you are owed, June Bug, every time, and someday read it back without crying. Grandma. I read the whole thing back this year, cover to cover, all 260 pages. Every 4:30 morning, every folded 20, every receipt. They swore we didn't keep. I read it back without crying. It took me 13 years, and it is done, and the account is balanced. They were right about one thing. My family doesn't keep receipts, so somebody has to. It might as well be the one they never paid. If this story was yours too, if you were the one they counted on and never counted, comment the word ledger below, so the next person scrolling at 4:30 in the morning knows they're not the only lit window on the street. Subscribe if you want the stories where the quiet ones win on paper. And wherever you are tonight, write down what you are owed every time. Someday, you'll read it back without crying. Someone just has to start the count.